Hello again. We're ready for our last lecture. This will be your last lecture of the semester. Hard to believe. Um, this will be with Chapter 21, Head and C-spine pathologies. We'll kind of talk about some current information, current trends, and we'll go from there, all right? Again, a review of the anatomy. We've got our frontal bone, all right, the forehead. Parietal bone makes up a vast majority of the skull, and then in the back we have the occipital bone, and then on either sides we have the temporal bone. So there you can see the TMJ that we talked about last section, temporomandibular joint. Just in front of that temporal bone is the sphenoid bone. All right, so really main bones of the skull: frontal, parietal, occipital, and then temporal. Now the brain. Again, you can read through just these key parts. I just want you to be aware kind of what function happens in these different sections. So again, bio, human phys, human anatomy, you'll go much deeper into this, any of your psych classes. But just be aware, for example, cerebrum gives us motor function, cerebellum gives us balance and coordination, diencephalon, processing center for conscious, unconscious thought. Really, why it's important to be aware of this from a kind of our standpoint is based on dysfunctions or based on problems or that we see following a head injury, we can really target it to that specific area of the brain. So it's just kind of a roadmap so we can match up the problem with the specific area of the brain. Now, the brain, as we know, is surrounded by three meninges, three layers. We can see their function there. Dura, arachnoid, and pia. Dura is outermost. It's the hard covering that sits just below the skull. Arachnoid is kind of this webbing, and then pia mater totally surrounds the brain and kind of gets into those grooves or sulci. Cerebrospinal fluid, really good analogy I heard a couple years ago at a conference was think of your brain like a jar of olives. Okay, the glass jar, that's your skull. Your brain is the olive that floats around, and the cerebrospinal fluid is that fluid within the jar. So mainly with CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, it's a buffer, okay, to help prevent that brain from sloshing around too much. There's going to be some movement every time we move our head, every time we get hit. There's always going to be that movement, but that brain colliding against the skull. But that CSF kind of slows it down. Now, when we look at injuries to the head, we look at coup versus counter coup. All right, coup is when a moving object hits your head and there's damage on that same side. Okay, so coup, direct blow. All right, we're hit by an object, there's damage to the brain on that same side that was hit. Counter coup is where we see damage on the opposite side. So we think of that brain sloshing around and kind of bouncing. And so if you, for example, were to hit your head on the back of this diving board, the brain's going to go forward, and then actually the front part is damaged. Okay, so coup versus counter coup. Those are kind of two areas you'll see in the research. History. All right, some questions. The most damaging or most dangerous position we can put the neck in is cervical flexion. So looking down, that puts more of an axial load that straightens that cervical segment, and that can be the most damaging position we see. So again, when we talk about proper technique, proper tackling, we always want to look up so we maintain that proper lordotic curve in the C-spine. Other history questions you might find. HA is headache. Okay, photophobia, remember, sensitivity to light. Tinnitus is ringing in the ears, okay, or dizziness. Those two are often associated together. Inspection, things to check. Again, palpate the cervical vertebrae. Look for any tenderness, any issues with palpation there. Mastoid process, so right behind the ear. Battle sign is that bruising. Could also indicate a skull fracture. With the cerebrospinal fluid, all right, in very, very significant, very traumatic injuries, you can actually lose, or that CSF can leak out of the skull. And typically it comes out of the nose or the ears. It's very clear, looks almost like a kind of like snot, very clear, almost like you have a runny nose. But what you can do is you can dab that fluid with like a cotton ball or a piece of gauze, and the outer rim will turn yellow while the middle stays clear. If you see that, if you happen to notice somebody gets hit and it looks like their nose is running, might be a good idea to take a Kleenex, take a piece of gauze, and try. We call it the halo test because the outer ring is yellow, but the inner stays white. So you see that halo. And that tells us that there's a CSF. That lets us know that there's a leak. There's probably a skull fracture. Things are going to get serious here very, very soon. Other things with a head injury, we always want to keep in mind vital signs. Okay, respiration, they might have a change in breathing pattern. Pulse could skyrocket or it could bottom out. Same thing with blood pressure. Okay, typically following a head injury though, blood pressure continues to rise. So good clinical skill anytime we're dealing with someone with a head injury, we always want to keep in mind and check those vital signs. With our neurological exam, we'll get to that in a little bit, but these are just kind of our main ideas. Some analytical skills you use, these are kind of the actual tests. For example, serial 7s count backwards from 100 by 7. You can do serial 6s, serial 3s, serial 4s, whatever it may be, but serial 7s is the most common. We also have months backwards, days backwards. Those just test the person's analytic ability and kind of help us get a sense of cognitive function. All right, memory. Memory loss is a major symptom following a head injury, and we can group memory loss into two categories, either retrograde or anterograde. Retrograde is you lost track of events prior to that injury. Okay, so you can't remember what happened before. So for example, they might not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast today, what their class schedule was, maybe where their room is. Sometimes that can be they don't remember a couple hours of the day. Other times that might be months, and in severe cases, maybe even years. Fortunately, though, in sports and kind of the settings that we work in with sports medicine, this retrograde amnesia resolves fairly quickly. Usually it's only maybe a day or two that the person will lose. Unlikely to see anything longer than that, but again, it can happen. Anterograde, they have trouble keeping track of events since the injury. This is where we see some problems with kids in like school, keeping track of their schoolwork, note-taking, homework, all that. Trouble focusing, all right? One good skill to test this is give them words to remember. In addition to those analytic skills, and again, keep asking them the same questions. But you'll notice kind of the theme throughout our head injury eval is you're going to repeat. Okay, a lot of repeat, a lot of asking the same questions, asking it different ways, really getting a good idea of where they're at from a cognitive standpoint. All right, with the cerebellum, again, that's our balance and coordination center. We can do a couple tests. Number one is Romberg's. You can see that. These look very similar, and there's a lot of crossover with the DUI test. Again, they're checking the cerebellum and whether it is impaired. So Romberg's, you're going to go finger to nose. Your arms are at 90 degrees. Your feet are together. Okay. If they can maintain that position with their eyes closed, then they can go to one leg. Then they can go finger to toes. There's a lot of different modifications, but Romberg is basically balance. BEST test stands for Balance Error Scoring System. That's more of a formalized balance test that we use. And then here's some other positions that you can have them do or have them try out to check that balance. Another chart I included just with cranial nerves. You can see the 12 and the different ways to test them. Again, kind of like our myotomes and dermatomes from earlier in the semester. Just straight up memorization. I always try and just run through them in order. I know others kind of group all the mouth together, all the eyes together, all the hearing together. When I learned them, it just worked better for me to remember olfactory, odor, optic, see something, oculomotor, pearl, eyelids, and just kind of try and memorize this chart. So whatever works for you. All right, we're going to stop there, and then I'll start my next lecture getting into really just talking about concussions and major kind of changes in research and our understanding over the last couple years.